Thank you. Thanks for having me. So I'm here to talk about the International Scientific Report on the Safety of Advanced AI, which was filed as an interim report in Seoul last May. But maybe I want to start with three very quick introductory remarks. The first one is just to extend thank you to PAI and the team. It really takes an army to make those events go smoothly, so I did want to highlight that. The second one is that everything I'm going to say engages only myself and Mila. It is not a representation of the UK or the French government or multilateral forums. The third one is just to extend an invitation to read the report. I have 10 minutes to present key findings, future NAI governance key questions. It's going to be fairly high level. It's a great piece of work that we've really thought of both hopefully as something that helps kind of creating consensus and creating direction, but also one to kind of start reconciling. I don't like talking about camps, but really bringing people together. So I hope we've achieved some of that, and I really want to invite all of you to read it. I will skip the promotional part and go straight to the report. Maybe just to put us back into context, the report was created what seems like a decade ago, but really we're talking 10 months ago at the Bletchley Summit, where there was a consensus that, and I think I don't need this mic. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, it's going to be easier. Where there was a consensus that AI offers tremendous opportunity, but policymakers felt like they weren't equipped to understand both the capabilities and the risks. And so the Bletchley Declaration, one of the key deliverables of it is to mandate the creation of a report with three very core pillars: inclusion, international, and independent. And that led to the appointment of my colleague Joshua Benjo as chair, but rapidly we formed three committees of experts, so 75 experts worldwide. The first committee is the expert advisory panel, one representative per country, and that's 30 countries, as well as one representative for the EU and the UN. And then you've got the senior advisors, so academic, independent academics, like peers of Joshua who can support him in the drafting and advise, as well as a writing group. And all of that is operationalized within the UK AI Safety Institute. And I want to give credit to the UK for having given full discretion over content to the experts. And I think that's something quite special in those multilateral contexts. And that allowed us to give a broad definition to safety, which includes current harms like discrimination and misinformation, as well as longer term risks. And finally, what you won't find in this report is policy recommendations, and that's because the mandate was really to try and digest and synthesize the science as much as possible so that policymakers had access to something that was readable for them, frankly, in a way that could then inform their policies. And that's why the report, we've really tried to kind of have it in a way three buckets. One, which is, what is it that we know and that is consensual across experts? What is it that we know but that is deeply debated? And what is it that we sincerely do not know and require more research about? Very quickly, some of the findings of the report. First, we propose a taxonomy of risks in three categories. The first one is malicious use risk. So think of deepfakes, disinformation, cyber attacks, and so on. The second one is the risks from malfunctions. And really here, the key is to remember that is basically the moment where there's no ill intent, but the system just doesn't do what it's supposed to be doing. So you're talking of discrimination, bias, and loss of control. And the last and largest one is the systemic risk. So that's when there is no ill intent in the deployer user. There is no malfunction, but the insertion of the system within a far more complex social integrated system creates tensions or risks. So you're thinking of labor market disruptions, AI divide between countries, but also between industry and academia capacities, market power concentration, environmental impacts, copyright, and so on. The second finding is that while there are technical methods available to mitigate some of those risks, they currently all have limitations. That's also true of testing and evaluations that are being developed currently, which are essential tools to identify strengths, weaknesses, and potential harmful capabilities, but they currently do not offer guarantees. The other finding, which frankly should make us all aware, if not frightened, is that all 75 experts kind of agreed that what we know is we know very little. So we don't fully understand the capacities of general purpose AI. nor do we understand fully their internal operations, and therefore, as best as we can think about describing the risks, we need to acknowledge that this is a partial understanding of them. The last one, which is where we switch really from being frightened to being excited, I hope, is that this reminder that kept coming back both in the scientific and the policymaking communities about the fact that AI doesn't happen to us. So Stuart Russell often says AI is not an alien artifact. It's something we develop, and that means that there is a way for policymakers, for societies, for developers to shape that trajectory. We can decide what problems it's designed to solve. We can decide who it serves. We can decide how the benefits get distributed. So it's really important to kind of bring this narrative forward so that you really go from a narrative of this is happening to me to a narrative where your decisions matter in the way that we shape those trajectories. One key finding that will surprise no one, but at least we'll have data for it now, is that on emerging risks, there is no consensus. And so when we asked 75 experts, what do you think will be the pace of progress and towards breakthrough, we literally had about a third between it will be very slow, it will be rapid, and it will be extremely rapid. So what that means is really that there's many different paths that seem plausible. It certainly means that policymakers should be afraid of people who come to them with certainties and assurances. We don't have those in the field currently. And one other thing that's really, really key to remember is almost no expert said that our institutions are ready to face those kind of breakthroughs. Instead, what we found is that the appreciation of whether those breakthroughs are going to come at all, or slowly, or very rapidly, is what influences their position on how we should act towards them. So nobody's saying our societies are ready and our institutions are ready, but people feel like we have either more or less time to ready up. So that's really where the crux of the matter lies. Future of the report. There's much we don't know. There's much I can't say. I certainly can confirm in front of Anne Boudreau, who's going to talk to you right after me, that we will be filing the final report as part of the AI Action Summit, and we're very grateful for the leadership of Friends to allow this conversation. The future after that is unconfirmed. You can think, of course, of many avenues for the report to continue existing. You can think of it as a contribution to the UN AI Scientific Panel, as a Safety Institutes Network contribution. Maybe there's a role for the OECD GPAI, and maybe there's a role for a bit of a collaboration or a consortium almost of actors. But I thought what might be most helpful is in fact tell you what the key principles that Mila thinks are essential for this to go successfully beyond Friends. The first one is to remain scientifically robust, so not to allow political capture. The second one is to keep a focus on capabilities and risks. It can, of course, live alongside a larger report that goes into SDGs, but there should be, this is specific science, and there should be specific focus. It needs to be inclusive, and by that I mean it needs to be more inclusive than it currently is, but it also needs to keep key AI powers, and really what I mean by that is China and the US have to be at that table for it to be meaningful. And lastly, it needs to be agile. So we need to be able to regularly update this because the science is just going at a crazy pace and policymakers need to have a source to turn to. I'll leave aside the areas of critical cooperation, maybe just to know that we will be extending formal invites for civil society and academia and industry, to provide feedback. So stay tuned, it's coming in it's waiting in my inbox between you and I. So it's coming. But I want to turn to calls to action and honor the request that PAI formulated, which I think is really important. I think the words of Stephanie were to make it spicy. I don't think I will succeed at that. But I've tried to kind of get to the frontier of like ambition and realism. The first one is, I guess, just a call for more alignment in the international, multilateral, international, and regional bodies. There's a limited amount of experts, and there's very little clarity around who leads on what and what matters the most. Most of you I've been speaking with at least 10 times in the last year in different venues. I adore all of you, but I think that our capacities could be so much better used if we were told clearly, this is where we need you and this is what we're trying to achieve. So that's my first call to action. The second one is building on our finding that what we know is we know little. This means we need far more research, including independent research, and we need an AI safety talent pipeline. If this is new science and new questions, then we need new blood and new experts, and that requires investment and thinking. The two last ones I'd say are, the first one is we need to be more inclusive. I can't say it enough, but I do want to emphasize in the AI safety conversation, it's quite homogeneous, even more than it is in the AI ecosystem, and frankly, the AI ecosystem is not scoring great either. That's something we need to keep in mind when we organize events like this, and it's been great, but every single time we advance on AI safety, there should be very diverse voices at the table, geographically, from a background perspective, from an expertise perspective, and I think that's the place we can really improve. The last one, which very niche, but I would kind of hate myself in a research institute to not mention it, is this is a time where we need scientists and independent advice at the table. And the structures of university evaluations are such that this is not something that is valued in their path. For a professor, advising governments and being there when it matters does not lead to being perceived as excellent. This has to change. This is a moment where we need them, and we need to create the space and the capacity for them to intervene. On this note, I thank you very much, and I'm happy if we have questions to go into it. I don't know if am I supposed to pass the mic? How does this work?
We can take one question, but
we don't have to. I'm happy to take them around the reception.
Hi, we'll take one question for Benjamin, and then I encourage you to find him at the reception later this evening.
Thanks. My name's Ilan Strauss. I'm an economist, so this is somewhat out of my wheelhouse. I've started a research project in AI disclosures with Tim O'Reilly at the Social Science Research Council, a nonprofit think tank in Brooklyn. My question is, in the report, was there a scientific consensus about whether we should be focusing on these short-term risks or these long-term existential risks? Again, not wanting to place anyone in a camp, but it helps us to think. And with regard to that, I'm not convinced of the correlation between risk and model capabilities, just like on a single vector. Because like you note in your own very helpful risk categorization, one of the risks is from a model malfunctioning, which implies that there's risks from a model having bad capabilities, or at least bad capabilities relative to use or relative to how the model is advertised, right? I mean, but when we think of the risks in everyday society, I don't want to labor the point, you have roads, people drive cars on roads. The risks are stemming from, again, systemic risks. You have a separate chapter on systemic risks and all these things. So it just seems like these useful concepts which you deploy land up becoming quite slippery because you introduce these other categories called systemic risks and social, technical factors and risks. So I'm curious to see how you see it in terms of capabilities, risks, and then the long-term versus short-term kind of risks, in, the scientific consensus on that. Thanks.
Given that I feel we want to go quickly to Anne, I'll take your second question offline. The only thing I'd say is I agree that the correlation is not perfect, but it's an important one, first. And second, the report's mandate was specific on science and technical. So there's part of the social technical issues that you're absolutely rightfully raising that was outside scope. And let's talk about it longer after. The first question is really the million-dollar question. And I want to put it out there. Everybody asked that once Yoshua Bengio was appointed because everybody knows he's a very strong voice on those questions. What I really kind of want to commend the report about is that the position we've taken is, in a way, this is a false economy and it's a false question. All the risks matter. And what matters most, in fact, is to start building a research consensus and understanding of what we know and what we don't know about each of those risks. There is, provided that we have the capacity which we had for this report, there is literally no reason to have to choose. We should care as much as we care about the capacities of future models to have an impact on developing biochemical weapons, as we should care about discrimination happen here and now, and we should be building evidence for policymakers to act on every one of those risks, or to know what it is that we don't know, which to me that's where the key is. I think that dichotomy, we've made a conscious effort to stay away from, because I think that's diverting the attention, and instead try to start building consensus about where can you act and where can you go and get more research. And that's really been the line of thought throughout. Thank you.